Atlanta. Are most of you okay? Okay. Yeah, I've been I'm wondering how many of you are in Atlanta and versus elsewhere in the country right now.
Raise your hand if you're in Atlanta. Most of us. Hey, Garry.
Hey, yo, how we doing?
How are
Okay.
you?
Good.
All right. I am adjusting the agenda a tiny bit because I made realize. Um, Give me 1 second here. So I think we will get started because we want to make the most of this short 50 minutes. I am so excited to have Mandy Lee and Garry Harris here with us today. Garry has been working with FLS since I think our first year, Garry, right? 2015, when you and I met in the City of Atlanta meeting.
That's right. We've been hanging ever since.
Yes, and Garry is consistently, all of our students always want to work with Garry. He's very, very popular.
That's because
So
I feed
we
them.
have, that's because you feed them and you take them on trips.
Take them on trips.
Yeah, but Garry we don't think Garry sleeps. I think he's secretly a robot. He does so much, none of us understands how it's possible. But he will tell you about his work, and you read about some of his work a little bit in Virginia, but he does work in Virginia and he does work in Atlanta, and he's very known nationally. And he is an engineer, right, Garry?
Right.
Go ahead, Garry. Tell him where you graduated from.
From the University of Virginia, who's now number 8 basketball team in the country, NCAA champs. Okay. Besides that, great engineering program as well. What was that? What did he say?
He is very enthusiastic about his alma mater, as you will learn if you spend any time with Garry. Mandy shaking her head. Sounds like you've heard the spiel before. So Garry just does amazing work around development and environmental justice and built environment and all kinds of things that he will tell you more about through the Center for Sustainable Communities that he founded and runs, and a lot of national work too with K-12 as well, and very into citizen science. Mandy came to the NAACP, what has it been now, 2 years? About 2 years to run this new amazing program called Centering Equity in the Sustainable Building Sector, and has done marvels in the 2 years that she has been there, facilitating large groups of people, largely virtually, from around the country, everyone from grassroots people involved in the different NAACP branches all around the country, to green building professionals, to academics like us, in coming together to really create this new movement as a real force in the sustainable building sector. And she's amazing at leading virtual meetings and putting things on Google Docs that actually result in incredible deliverables that are very, very collaboratively produced, as I'm sure you all saw when you read this incredible community engagement guidelines document. So with that, I will let each of you, when it is your turn, say more about yourselves. I didn't want to read your bios. Everybody has looked you up. But what we thought we would do is have Mandy speak for about 10 or 15 minutes or so, a little bit about the NAACP. Many of you are are young, you probably are new to the NAACP itself, even though it's a very historic organization. And then the Centering Equity in the Sustainable Building sector, leading up to the kind of story behind the creation of the community engagement guidelines, which I think are just the first edition of what will be a couple different versions of them targeted at different audiences. And then we'll have a little bit of discussion, and then Garry can give us a little bit more about his work and a little more backstory and news story on what's happening with the Rivers Casino. And then we'll have a little more discussion and do announcements, and our time will go really quick. And I think, Mandy, you have to leave at 10, is that right? So we have Mandy until 10, and I think we have Garry the whole time. So we are recording this, and Mandy, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. And hi, everyone. It is really exciting to meet you all virtually, and it's been a pleasure to hear about the kind of work that you've been doing together in this class. So my name's Mandy. I use she, her pronouns. Like Jenny said, I've been at the NAACP for a couple of years. Before that, I was actually at the U.S. Green Building Council working on setting requirements in the LEED rating system for buildings, the Green Building Rating System, about social equity and what that means in relationship to design and development. And came to the NAACP at a time when an initiative had just kicked off. Our senior director of environmental and climate justice, Jackie Patterson, had been having a really interesting conversation with our leadership about our headquarters building, actually. The NAACP headquarters is in Northwest Baltimore, and it had become a pretty sick building, actually, one that was not terribly safe for staff to be in anymore, with mold and asbestos issues in the past, safety issues, and so on. And this story actually isn't too unusual for historically Black institutions like ours, where we have been historically underfunded compared to white-led nonprofits, and every dollar that we get goes towards staffing and programs and our members. So there was a big turning point a couple of years ago when Jackie, our senior director, advocated that we need to think seriously about what our property means to us and the model that it could set for the rest of the country. So as we've been thinking about redeveloping our old headquarters building, actually moving into a new headquarters building in Washington, D.C., our leadership committed to building a model of really deep sustainability and equitable development. And as the NAACP started talking more and more about green buildings, which hasn't been a conversation topic for pretty much all of our history before now, our staff started to realize that each time they were meeting partners or showing up in green building conferences or event spaces, it was almost entirely white. Very rarely were there even other people of color in the room, let alone other Black folks. So the initiative actually expanded hugely to go way beyond just our buildings, to talk about this industry, which is similar to a lot of other environmental fields, for being pretty white and pretty affluent and serving pretty white and pretty affluent communities first and foremost. Meanwhile, our mission at the NAACP is to basically ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of all citizens. And our environmental and climate justice program does that by working with our more than 2,000 local branches across the country to run policy campaigns, to do community projects, and more. And so with environmental and climate justice, we seek to, number one, reduce harmful emissions in Black and brown communities and low wealth communities, and that's mostly greenhouse gas emissions. Number two, we want to ensure a transition to renewable energy in those communities, and not just make a transition to renewable energy, but actually make a political transition and an economic transition too. So figuring out how we can ensure that Communities that have kind of borne the brunt of environmental pollution and the impacts of climate change have ownership and control over the energy solutions that are needed. And then lastly, our third goal is to build the resilience of our members' communities. So climate change, of course, is already here, right? And this crisis is already disproportionately impacting people on the front lines, and will only continue to get worse. And so we also do projects that try to increase the health and well-being, survivability of Black and Brown communities. Okay, so that's kind of the big picture. And the Centering Equity in the Sustainable Building Sector Initiative, like the NAACP actually when it was first founded, is a multiracial network of NAACP members and building and sustainability professionals around the country who are all working together to try to reorient the industry and its priorities. When we think about sustainability, we think about not just environmental sustainability, but economic and cultural sustainability as well. Basically, there's an amazing quote that one of our members shared when we first kicked off this initiative, that sustainability without equity is sustaining inequity. If we're not being really intentional about bringing the benefits of sustainable design and development to Black and Brown communities, low wealth communities, those who stand to gain the most and have had historically the least access to these benefits, then we're just creating sustainability for the affluent. And then of the many, many different types of things we do, a conversation that we continuously have is that we want to really change a norm about the building industry in terms of the level of participation of community residents who are affected by design and development decisions. Kind of the status quo for what community engagement looks like is pretty minimal, right? If it's even there at all. Like at best, you might have some public comment that's like legally required to be done, but only people who happen to know about the meeting and are already engaged and have free time during the workday to show up at a meeting where they may or may not get a couple of minutes to speak. That's kind of the way public engagement goes. But we've seen examples where community involvement can really be transformative and in fact go way beyond just engagement on the spectrum, which I think you probably all saw, all the way over to ownership, where communities are actually saying, here is what we need and how can you help us get there, instead of just being kind of given a couple of minutes to say, I hate this or I love this. So the community involvement guidelines that we've developed try to help paint a picture for community residents of how they can get involved in design and development and some of the strategies that are needed to get to that level of community ownership instead of just engagement. And basically our bottom line is that if you're looking at that spectrum, at the very minimum, we should all be striving for community involvement, meaning that community needs and assets are integrated into the development and design process and inform planning. And that means that basically at least half of whatever resources are going into the planning of a project should be dedicated towards involving community. So hosting events and bringing in partner organizations that are trusted within, especially within Black and Brown and low income communities, having a lot of interaction. And that's just the minimum, right? The potential for what community involvement can look like is really amazing and enormous. Okay, so I think I want to talk about just a couple of examples from the community involvement guidelines to just paint a little bit of a picture. We've been hearing a lot of different stories from our members, both good and bad, and I think that their stories are actually some of the most interesting. And you'll hear more from Garry about this. But one example that I'll share is is actually one from where I live here in Washington, D.C. Um, there is a public housing community here that had been promised a huge redevelopment about 12 years ago. And it was supposed to be a model for the rest of the country of how to avoid displacing people when you're redeveloping public housing, and to ensure that residents can help lead and drive the process. Um, there was a steering committee created with residents on that steering committee. There were community engagement workshops. Um, Residents had the opportunity to kind of look at some of the designs for the redevelopment project and so on. And slowly but surely, they kind of stopped hearing anything from the DC Housing Authority and from the design team. What's happened since then is that basically there have been legal challenges to the project from neighbors who don't want to see public housing in their community, and the kind of level of influence of different voices has become really, really clear. That residents are the last to be informed about what's going to happen to their homes, um, and kind of the last to be given a say. And one of the strategies that we talk about in the guidelines that I think is really, really important is the idea of residents being able to create and assert their own vision for what they want development to be like in their community, and then use that as a tool to advocate, not only for a better engagement process, but for better outcomes. So these public housing residents actually came together and developed an equity plan. And because that vision of DC helping to demonstrate what zero displacement would look like has not come true. They have not been able to build, for example, replacement housing that people could move into while their site's being redeveloped. And therefore, they have been telling people they need to move, and they've been scattered all over the city. The equity plan says, okay, if we're not going to be a leader and an example for that within DC, then here's what we think would actually be leadership. We want to have an equity stake in the development. They're actually asking to be owners, in a sense, of a portion of this project. They're also asking that one of the buildings that's going to be redeveloped be turned into a limited equity housing cooperative, which means that there's permanent affordability and complete community control over that particular building. So those are just a couple of examples of the way in which residents can kind of just completely flip the narrative and assert their own interests. And basically since then, in Washington, D.C., these residents have amassed like a huge community outpouring of support. It's still to be seen what parts of their equity plan will be adopted or not. This is an active process that's happening right now. But I did want to just share that as an example of what community ownership could look like in a really, really difficult development situation. And I think I'll probably pause there, and since I only have a few minutes left, so that we can start chatting and I can hear your reactions to that and some of your questions and reflections.
Mandy, hi, this is Gary. I'll try and kick it off. Through our research, where have been the real pain points for communities to engage in these processes? I.e., well, I'll let you do it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And Gary, I'd love for you to fill in your
Yeah, I will.
answers. But some of the things that we've heard are that there's kind of been an expectation that if community engagement is happening, it's up to residents to hear about it and show up, right? So it's being hosted kind of on the terms of the developers or government officials, typically during their working hours when they're getting paid to be there, right? Whereas residents won't be, and often become inaccessible, especially during the pandemic, for a couple of different reasons. Number one, if folks aren't able to access virtual platforms, either because they don't have the technology, they don't have reliable access to Wi-Fi, or they don't have kind of savvy of how to even navigate different platforms online. That's one thing. Number two, we've heard that even sometimes when engagement processes promise that they'll have multiple languages available, um, that it doesn't work out for a number of reasons. That you really need to be thoughtful about knowing what the needs are of people who are trying to show up to an engagement process, um, and and make a space that is catering to them instead of catering to whoever's hosting the process. Um, those are just a few pain points. Really, I think the biggest pain point is mostly that there is no engagement process, or that you don't know about the engagement process and then it's over. And then they said they did one, but nobody actually really understood what was available.
Hi, I have a question, if that's okay, as well. It's not on that note necessarily, but on the last thing you were talking about was like you were talking about like community ownership of the building. And I'm in a group and we're looking at like implementing a sustainable e-bike and e-trike system in the Clarkston community to provide last mile transportation solutions. And we really want it to be community controlled in the long run. So like the bikes and the bike system are owned by some outside corporation, like it's the people in the community using the bikes that own them. Do you have any advice for kind of like starting that conversation with the community about like, hey, like, do you want to have control of these bikes? Like, how do you see that happening? Like, what is the best way to kind of implement that relationship and that structure?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely be curious about whether there are any kind of trusted community leaders who you might talk to who can help create spaces to talk about this more widely with the community, or local organizations who are active talking about transportation equity. Um, and and I think it's important not to assume that um, that an an e-bike system is the solution, and it's just a matter of like how to do it. It's possible too that there may be ideas for last mile transportation that are even more effective than kind of. I know I'm assuming you're talking about like a rental system, right? Like a dock of bikes that people can rent and then bring back, right?
Yeah, like they can go and get their groceries and like come back and like they were talking about like docking the bikes like kind of at the apartment complexes and they could be owned by families. We're still trying to like figure it out. And we're also planning on running a survey to kind of like gauge what the community's, opinions and also like needs are. And also thoughts, because we don't want to just like bring a bike system in and like replace things that they have, established.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think yeah, it would be interesting to think about using this opportunity to build like a local cooperative business, like um, engaging entrepreneurs who might be interested in actually building out a small business around this, or students or other youth in the community. I know in DC, for example, there's a youth run bike cooperative that not only sells bikes but maintains them. So just thinking about like the actual physical structure that would help ensure economic equity, that would be potentially one way to do it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Those are awesome ideas.
I also have a question. So, yeah, like whenever we're thinking about community development or public housing, I think there's a pretty normal phenomenon, which is like a NIMBY effect, not in my backyard. So, if all the residents in the community they actually seize their benefit from their own perspectives, um, it's hard to balance that sort of forces from different aspects. So, from engagement to ownership, I think that's a great idea, but I just want to know how NAACP plays a role to actually guide the residents in the developments in the community in order to make them have their like 100% ownership in society.
Yeah, absolutely. Hold on one second. My phone is ringing. I'm literally going to just turn it off and be right back. Okay. So the question is, how do you navigate the competing forces of different communities trying to express their interests, right? And how the NAACP specifically uses different strategies to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. It's a huge question, and I think it's different depending on every single situation. Um, a lot of it, I would say, ends up being about navigating political dynamics, um, unfortunately, because essentially, in this case with public housing, we're talking about government officials and elected officials making decisions. And so they may feel more beholden to constituents who are wealthier, who are more likely to be the ones saying not in my backyard. Um, One of the strategies that we've used here is building coalitions, and this is something we talk about in the guidelines too, that um, basically there is strength in numbers, especially when you're able to bring in allies who are coming from a place of power and privilege. So, for example, here in DC, I talked about a lot of neighbors actually um, changing the narrative that everyone doesn't really want public housing in this community. The public housing residents have actually connected to probably 5 or 6 different local organizations that are actually mostly people who have not been in the neighborhood for a long time. They're transplants. A lot of them are wealthier, white, a lot of millennials, um, and they've built coalitions for advocacy so that these folks can go to their elected officials and say, hey, I really care about this public housing community. I care about these neighbors of mine, and exert that influence, and counter the influence of people saying not in my backyard. So I think coalitions has probably been one of the most effective strategies that we've used. And I see Garry nodding. I'm wondering if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that. But particularly when coalitions come from various ally status, everything from environmental groups joining a coalition, or specialists like architects and engineers providing that sort of technical expertise as well, lawyers joining in as well, community advocates and leaders, et cetera, et cetera. The key to this, however, is having a cause that everyone can unite around, and at the same time, bringing everyone together in a synergy towards one aim, one goal, one objective, and such, and then getting everyone to move in that singular direction. And that is hard to do, really hard to do, particularly when the developer is dangling a prize out here, a 50 million, a $100 million development, and he's promising jobs, and he's promising access to his pool, and access to his clubhouse, et cetera, et cetera. That becomes very, very enticing for residents, and residents become divided, because of those things. But what happens is residents don't have the information they need to make objective decisions either. These developers don't come to the table with honest answers or open answers to questions, about the effects of the development, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a tough nut to crack. It really is.
Mandy, I want to make sure I know it's 10 o'clock. You have to take off, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
But thank you all so much for letting me speak, and you're in amazing hands with Garry, who is a co-author of these guidelines and has a ton of lived experience um, working in involvement. So thank you all so much.
Mandy, before you leave, I also just want to say thank you for advising the Candida and Capstone teams. I know that they have enjoyed. Raise your hand if you're on this call and you're a member of one of those teams. So you will be hearing from them, I'm sure, soon, and we just so appreciate your speaking, but also just your support of this undergraduate research team and all of the work that you're doing at the NAACP. So thank you and enjoy the snow.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
All right, Garry, my friend, the floor is yours for a few minutes.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. Well, as Mandy described, this is a difficult environment for residents, for stakeholders. When a developer comes into the community, he's making promises after promise after promise and such. How do you effectively manage that? If I'm a resident of the community, I don't know anything about the zoning process. I don't know anything about the development process. I don't know anything about how I can interject and be effective in that process as well. Well, through painful learning, I want to try and share. I have 30 examples here of ways to do that. I don't think I'm going to get through all 30, but here goes. Again, how can I have full, meaningful, participant engagement of the community? Well, first and foremost, I need to insist on meaningful community engagement from the planning organization, the the redevelopment organization, and also city council. Okay, I need to make sure that an engagement is routine, it's frequent, it's visible, it's deliberate, it's intentional, and such. And we're not just checking a box, but we're doing stuff in a rightful manner to get the community involved. So insist on meaningful engagement and remove checking a box or status quo approaches. Um, Next, we want to ensure that there's meaningful engagement of the community in the planning process. Okay, and this means more than just showing up at the planning hearing, but i.e., as the design takes place, community residents are at the table in a participatory manner. Helping the designers, helping the planners to move the development along in a direction that meets their vision. Full participation, not just a charrette here, not just a hearing there, but throughout the planning process, throughout the development process, community is engaged in a meaningful manner. Um, Next is insist on the conduct of an impact assessment. When these development goes go when the developments are planned, they can have serious impacts, significant impacts on communities. More than likely, community residents are unknowledgeable of those impacts because they've not been made aware by the developer or the planner or city council, etc. And these impacts include gentrification, development-induced displacement, pollution, traffic, you name it. These things can occur as a result of development being placed in or near communities and such. So the conduct of a community impact assessment by the community or by the developer will reveal these impacts, and these impacts can then be mitigated by the community or by the developer. Again, assist in the conduct of an impact assessment. Next, assess the adequacy of project timelines versus project scope. Example: um, clearly, when these projects take place, there's a certain steps which have to take place: permitting, zoning, public hearings, and then it gets approved by city council, etc., etc. Insist that these critical steps are done in a manner to allow public engagement, to allow communities to interject into these processes and not just rush through. Example, if you're doing a change to a zoning ordinance, that the public, the number one, that doesn't understand zoning, and number two, that they need time to understand what the impacts of the zoning change is. So again, we want to ensure an adequacy of the project timelines versus the project scope as well. Next is quickly here. Assess the adequacy of third-party engagement specialists, i.e., bring in everybody you can into this process. Bring in the architects, bring in the engineers, bring in the consultants to build this collaborative and coalition as strong as possible, such that when you're doing your cumulative impact assessment, that there's validity to it, that there's credibility to it as well. So again, bring in the third-party specialists and engagement. Also, be mindful of the fact that some public entities use a third party entity to engage with the community, vice the city department or the developer. Example, the planning department hires a consultant to do the community engagement. That's fine, but the relationship should be between the community and the planning department, and not the community and that third party consultant and such. That leads to ineffective approaches to community engagement. So when you see that, question that and make sure that the community is engaging with the primary authority, which is the planning department. Use technology whenever possible to maximize communications. Not just Facebook, not just other social media platforms, but get creative and innovative in the use of technology to engage the public. Insist on early inclusion in the process as early as possible. When they first start to think about the development, make sure that the community is at the table, talking with the planning department, talking with the developer, talking with the city council, and not after they've got the design done and then they bring you in and such. Early intervention as possible. Do not rely on elected officials. Do not rely on elected officials to take care of the community needs. The community needs to take ownership of that and such, and use elected officials as their allies, but don't rely on the political process to provide the community with the satisfaction it needs in terms of its vision for the development. Build a coalition of stakeholders and residents. This is key. This is absolutely key.
Hey, Garry.
Yeah.
Garry, can this be your
Sorry.
final point, and we'll open it up for questions, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions for you, and we want to make sure we have at least like 7 minutes.
Okay. And man, I got pages and pages of stuff here. Okay. All right. Let me finalize with this point. This is 10 out of 30 here. Build a coalition. Make sure that you have a strong coalition of residents, of key stakeholders, business leaders, of faith leaders, of folks who are interested in the community coming together for collaborative problem solving, collective impact, moving in unison together. Because these developers are billion-dollar people with deep pockets, and they're getting in, and they're passing money around to the city council, to the planning department, et cetera, trying to get their development done. The only thing that you have is people power. But the more people, the more power. And I got 20 other points here, but I'll stop. I get up 5 o'clock this morning. Okay, questions?
Questions, comments, students, this is your opportunity. Don't be shy. Lauren or Chelsea or Thomas, Lisa, Kaylee, Vika, Andrew, you have anything you want to ask?
Yeah.
Know more about?
Yeah, I have a question. So, like, how can we make sure that community engagement occurs? Like, how do we make sure this happens without making it like checking the boxes, but like,
Yeah, how about that?
yeah.
Great question. One, they need to utilize the guidance that we have developed for them. In NAACP guidelines have really prescriptive elements in them, which would describe how meaningful engagement should be conducted. So use of the guidelines. Next, they need to have a plan for meaningful engagement, which spells out exactly from soup to nuts, from start to finish, how that engagement is going to take place, the frequency of meetings, the types of meetings, the content of those meetings, et cetera, should be laid out in a plan. And again, not just handed off to some third party consultant, who's just getting paid to do a little bit of work, and they can point you to say, well, hey, look, that's Lisa over there. She's our community engagement specialist, that sort of thing. And so they passed the buck on the Lisa. So using our guidelines that we developed, insisting on meaningful community engagement, residents inserting themselves into every possible part of the process here and such, and then having a plan which is developed by the residents or by the planning association, which again insists on deliberate intentional engagement.
Thank you, Garry.
You got to work it, Yeah. Next question.
I have one.
Oh, go ahead.
I guess just a thought, because you were mentioning about how like community members don't necessarily have the information or the informed decision to like have one. So I know the guidelines mention to be weary of to educating the community. So just like how do you go about like giving informed decisions and like just knowing if the community wants to know it without making them feel like not inferior, but in the way of like they don't want it. Do you under? I don't know if
I get it. I
got that
get it.
across. Okay.
I get it. Yeah. And number 19 here is gain knowledge of planning and development processes. Okay. And number 20 is here participate frequently and often in each phase of the public hearing process. Well, you got to educate folks, and the way that we do it, we kind of approach it from a democracy perspective. We say, let's strengthen our democracy. How do you strengthen our democracy? Well, you've got to be knowledgeable of that planning process. You've got to be knowledgeable of that redevelopment process. So we give folks links to how to understand planning. How to understand development, and we send these out via social media and such. We insist that people engage in the public hearing process, and we tell them the dates and the times to be there for that. So it's a matter of spoon feeding folks, but it doesn't happen once. You've got to do it over and over and over and over again because these communities are huge. Our community is 6,000 people, 15,000 homes, largest African American community in the country. How do you reach those people? Normally, let alone for a specific, narrow focused entity like a development process. Well, the way you do it is you you just have to be intentional about it, be deliberate about it. You use social media as frequent and as often as possible. You hit on key themes that will excite them and such, like prosperity for all. You walk the streets and talk to them, et cetera, et cetera. You may say, well, let's bring them in for education session. Well, that won't reach everybody. It won't. So it's a matter of continuously pushing out information, and that's what we do. We continuously push out information. We continuously challenge our residents to get involved. We continuously educate them and such. We continuously let them know when there's opportunities for hearings, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Garry, how many miles you walking a day these days?
Oh man, between 5 and 8.
Lauren, you had a question too. This might be our last question, so let's hear it.
Sounds good. I
kind of along the lines of what you're talking about on like kind of pushing out information and, getting a lot of members of the community involved. Do you have any kind of recommendations or things that have worked within the past months of, doing that in the context of COVID? And kind of like, because I remember something from the document that like really stood out was the idea of moving at the speed of trust, like with
Yeah, exactly.
members of the
Yeah.
community. So how do you foster those relationships during a pandemic?
Great question. Great question. You build trust by being genuine, by being authentically engaged, by being frequently engaged, by being visible, by walking the talk, by showing outcomes, and by meeting people where they are. So in COVID, that means walking the streets, and talking with folks. That means focus groups, okay? That means social media after social media after social media and such. That means showing progress, for instance, this week, believe it or not, we're launching 6 projects in the community. Everything from Energy for All through a resilience hub. Well, that's exciting stuff. So put that out there and tell folks to get involved. Not the fact that we're going to do this, but hey, let's do this together. And here's some opportunities for engagement. And grandma always want to see something. Okay, so you got to give grandma her props, and that means that you got to get the work done. You know, if grandma wants to see a park, so show her the park that you've done. But bottom line there has to be outcomes. Okay, people believe what they see, and that builds trust. So if you say I'm gonna build a park, damn it, you got to build that park. And grandma wants to see that park as well. So so yeah.
Gary, before we wrap up and go to just announcements, so you do a lot of work. Gary's on the leadership circle of RCE Greater Atlanta, and at any given time with Georgia Tech, he's got maybe 4 or 5 or maybe more projects going on with different SLS and other courses,
Uh-huh.
and he always has interns over the summer. If students are interested in looking into ways to support your work, can you give them a couple, tell them how to do that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I would love to have you. We are always excited to have interns, and as you see, the work never stops, and we need the support. So yeah, reach me at G Harris at csc-atl.org. G Harris at csc-atl.org. You can reach me there or call me up. I'm up 3 o'clock in the morning, so hit me. I'm at 404-936-0620, 404-936-0620. Quickly, we have embarked on a series of projects called Legacy 50. We're trying to leave a legacy of projects and programs and activities and events so that we can transform this world to be more just, sustainable, equitable, and resilient. Legacy 50. So I got projects, I got activities, I got events. So if you're excited, I can put you to work.
Gary, thank you so much. We are going to move over to Bonnie and Jimmy for a minute worth of announcements. So you are welcome to stay for that minute or feel free to hop off. But thank you so much for spending this time with us. And, I'm sure you and I will be emailing later this afternoon.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Uh-huh.
All right. Thank you, Gary. That was very informative. As far as announcements, next week we're going to have presentations in sub-teams about your deliverable plans. So this is what you plan to turn in over the course of the semester and when. And we're looking at, it's on the wiki, the class schedule, the dates for deliverables. So take a look at that and discuss in your next sub-team meeting. So as far as homework for next week, it's going to be those slides explaining your deliverable plan, and then just a wiki entry in your individual notebook, just updating your progress. I don't think we have office hours this week. I think our next session is after next week's class. So stay tuned for that. And I think the last thing is we have that event coming up that is Mandy's boss at the NAACP. She's giving a talk. Hang on, I'm looking for my information right here. That's going to be next Wednesday, I think, maybe. Sorry.
The 17th.
Billion
I think
events.
it's the 17th.
Okay, it'll be on the 17th. Yes, Jackie Patterson is giving an Emory climate talk. So look for the details on that in the announcement I'm going to send out later. And then I think I had some questions about how students sign up for Candida tours with Jimmy. So I'm assuming that's what Jimmy's announcement is about. So I'll turn that over to him.
Yeah, so I sent an email this morning with a couple of times tomorrow. However, I don't know class schedule, so please feel free to email me and say, hey, Jimmy, it might be better to do 2:55 to 3:55 or something, right? I have put out those 2 invites. One person has accepted. If I don't get 3 or 4, then please just go ahead and suggest times, and we'll get stuff that works. But if you check your email, I sent out one for tomorrow at 10 a.m. and another one at 3 p.m. Those are flexible tomorrow. So shoot me an email, and we will work to get everybody a tour in the next couple of weeks. In addition to that, I know we have about half the group who has done a tour before, and I helped co-found. I'm a founding board member of Lifecycle Building Center, which is a nonprofit that the Candida building utilized heavily in the building. So I think it would be fitting for us to maybe for the students who have already done a tour at Candida to do a tour at Lifecycle. And I know Allie was interested in that, and we're looking at maybe doing something on a Friday afternoon. So shoot me an email, let me know some times, and we will get the tour scheduled.
Sorry, one more thing. We are going to have a time conflict meeting. That's for the students that don't join our team meetings. Thursday, the 4th of March at 11 a.m. I think a Blue Jeans invite went out for that. It's open to everyone, and it is going to have a guest speaker from CDPDI talking about, this is the Black Landscapes speaker, right, Jenny? Okay. Yeah, so more details about that in my Canvas announcement later. I'm sorry to keep you all over time. As always, if there's anything else, just shoot me an email.
Hey, I bought that book and I finished reading it. If somebody wants my copy, just send me an email.
It's amazing, by the way. She's going to, CPDI Africa is going to be really, really cool speaker, and the Black Landscapes Matter photo essay and the essay I'll send out from the book is really interesting. So if you are free on that date at that time, I highly encourage you to join us for that. All right, everybody. Thank you. Have a great week.